And I just, me personally, if I was a fan watching the show, I would have went, oh. It would have been, and that was a Vince term. That's not good heat. That's disgusting heat.
Yep.
And that's one of the terms he said. And that was the kind of thing. So that was where I was against that. But I still thought the dog pound match still could have been interesting. The problem was, I think that it was a little bit of, just execution-wise. And I'm not putting it on the guys.
Yep.
I just mean just the way the whole match came together. It wasn't as well thought out, and that's as much on us as it is on anybody else.
And what was your?
Mine was on. DX was hot at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Shawn, Hunter, and Chyna, and I mean they were hot. And I'll never forget, sitting at Vince's table and him telling me that he wanted to start these New Age Outlaws with Billy Gunn and Jesse James.
Yep.
And I looked at him like, "What are you out of your mind?"
Yep.
I mean, I did not see that at all. But
Yep.
he was like, "No, Vince, I'm telling you, there's something about these two guys. If we put them together, so I was like, "All right, let's do it." And I mean, sure enough. But man, the first time he threw that out at me, I looked at him like he had two heads. But I mean, by the time we put that group together, I mean, it was phenomenal.
All right, Steve Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin, changed the wrestling industry, because at the time the NWO in WCW was huge. It had revolutionized wrestling. There was this heel group. The circumstances of the moment were just incredible. WCW is so far ahead of WWE at this point, it almost seems hopeless. Then this guy, Steve Austin, comes around. They settle him with the grab bag gimmick, the ringmaster, which is, you guys maybe can talk about this. There were prefabbed gimmicks that were the result of brainstorming sessions, and one of them was the ringmaster, and they just applied it to Steve Austin. Mm-hmm. And all of that changed. He broke through it. Talk about the Steve Austin phenomenon, especially your impression of him and your involvement in that evolution of a character who became, next to Hulk Hogan, the most successful money-drawing wrestler in this country's history.
Can I throw 2 cents in before you go? Because at the
let's
time
let's first plug your book.
Well, we don't have to plug my book.
Ed
I brought a book.
Where did they get this at?
At edferrara.com.
What's the name of the book?
It's called Dark Consequences.
Can you tell us a little bit? Okay. No.
Okay. That's an Easter egg.
You
We'll
owe me
one. As a fan, let me just throw it out because that was right before I came in. But at the time, I was a huge wrestling fan. Working indies, watching as much as I could. I had bought Prime Star Cable just so I could get ECW programming from the East Coast because I was living in Southern California at the time. And Steve Austin was a guy who, when I was watching WCW, and this was when WCW was starting to come up and just pre-NWO, but when they were starting to get their stuff together, and I always looked at Steve Austin, I said, this guy, at the time, the way I put it was, this guy's going to be the next Ric Flair, in terms of the guy who had it, the guy who had the charisma, and who could back it up, and who could go in the ring, and who could go out there and look good against anybody, make anybody look good. And when Austin came into the WWF, first of all, I was ecstatic that finally, in my mind, he had made it to the show. Yeah. Because me being a lifelong WWF fan, growing up in the Northeast, that was all I knew, all I wanted, all I watched. And then when I saw him brought in as the ringmaster, I just held my head. I couldn't believe that they were going to blow this one.
They assigned him, Ted DiBiase, to be his spokesperson, right, because he couldn't cut a promo, according to the powers that be at that time.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Let me add a little insight to that. I never saw Austin at ECW. I mean, I didn't, but I was. I
WCW.
I saw him. I was a stunning Steve Austin fan.
And you were in WWF when Austin was first there. So let's set that
and I was a stunning Steve Austin fan with the long blonde hair. I always liked him, And I'll never forget, at the time before I started really writing the television, I would write a lot of promos for the guys. So I would go to Vince and I would say, Vince, what do you want this character to be, or what do you want that character to be, to get a feel for how to write the promos. And I'll never forget when, Austin started as the ringmaster. The first time I heard the ringmaster, and I'm not even lying to you, I thought it was a circus gimmick. I didn't even get.
That's what you said. I was expecting him to come out with a top hat.
I didn't even get the ring. I didn't get that. I'm thinking that, really. I mean, the first time it was told to me, I'm like,
I was thinking the old Spider-Man villain, the ringmaster.
Yeah, but anyway, I remember saying to Vince, Vince, what do you want me to do for Steve Austin's character?
Yeah.
And I remember him looking me dead in the eye and him saying to me, Vince, he's never to speak And if he does, he's only to speak in a monotone. Okay? So now the thing was, I had to go to the next TV and work with Austin. And I had to tell him this. I said, Steve, this is what Vince wants. And, I got to be honest with you. At that moment, he was bursting at the seams because inside was Stone Cold Steve Austin. Yep. But he did it. I mean, he was a professional, and as wrong as it felt, he did it. But I'll never forget the first breakthrough. And I mean, I'll never forget it was, it was just another Raw. It was no big deal. But we put Austin on headsets. Mm-hmm. And the minute he put on those headsets and I listened to him, I was like, that's it, man. That is it. And I remember, him walking through the curtain, and he at that point it was always, how'd I do, Vince? How'd I do? And I just looked at him and I said, Steve, that's it. I mean, that's all you needed was that opportunity.
His confidence was shot at this point.
Absolutely.
In WCW,
right.
He was the Hollywood Blondes with Brian Pillman.
Right.
They were a hot act. Steve Austin, as U.S. champion, was cutting really good promos, and nobody who mattered, who had power, was taking notice because of the politics and the power structure.
Right.
He wasn't elevated by Dusty Rhodes. He was kept down.
Right.
Then he gets fired by Bischoff in one of the most infamous moves by a leader ever because he wasn't marketable. Quote from Eric Bischoff, he wasn't marketable. Then he goes to ECW, and he's so mad. There's so much anger pent up. He goes nuts, and he starts doing these imitations, and he starts
He was
finding
one of the
himself.
first guys to do the Hogan, one of the boys to do a Hogan impression.
He did Hogan, and he did Bischoff, and those were the two powers that he felt held him back. That just inspired him, and he got his confidence back, and people are praising him who were ECW fans. And then all of a sudden he goes to the WWF, and did Vince McMahon not see this? Did he not? Had he not seen the footage?
Let me make one thing. First of all, people don't understand this.
Yeah.
Vince never watched ECW.
Yep.
Vince couldn't tell you one single person in ECW. Never watched it. But let me tell you this when it comes to Steve Austin, okay? Credit goes to nobody but Stone Cold Steve Austin.
And Paul Heyman
Period.
would be the first to say that.
All we did was put him in right situations.
Okay.
But I am telling you, he was professional. He did exactly what Vince wanted. But when he was given that one opportunity,
he ran with it.
There is nobody to give credit. Not Vince, not me, nobody but Steve Austin.
Now the headset thing. How long was that before the King of the Ring, Austin 316, is born?
Probably about 3 weeks to a month.
Mm-hmm. Now, how planned out, to the best of your knowledge, was the
bro,
speech?
I got to be honest with you.
Talk about the T-shirt.
I'll tell you about a couple things.
Yeah.
Were you there for this?
No, that was right before me.
These are some good stories, though, and I hate to do all the talking, Ed, but
that's
they're
okay.
good
I'm used
stories,
to it.
I'll plug your book again.
Okay, plug your book again.
But
Maybe
there's
I'll
a
go
couple
out
of
and have a
things
smoke.
here. I'll never forget the night of King of the Ring. Okay, Ed wasn't there. So as far as promos and everything went, I was doing everything. Okay, and Ed can tell you, I always work with tunnel vision. I got tunnel. If I'm working on something, it's tunnel vision. It's tunnel vision. It's tunnel vision. So I remember Austin coming up to me and saying, "Vince, I want to run this promo by you." So I said, "Okay, Austin," but I was thinking about something else.
Yeah.
And he's giving me the promo, and in the promo I hear Austin 316, and I got tunnel vision. I'm doing something else, you know. So he went out there and he cut the promo, and it was. We'll get into The Rock in a minute. But as soon as I heard Austin 316...
Now, did Vince McMahon and did you...
Wait a minute.
No.
There's a follow-up story.
You'll get a kick out of this. You'll get a kick out of this. As soon as he said, Austin 316 says, I just said, that's it, man. That is it. Okay? I ran back to Titan Tower on Monday. Okay? And I remember the Raw magazine, we were like in the second or third issue. I immediately got a picture of Austin for the cover, black and white, grainy, and we highlighted the blood. And the headline was Austin 316 because I knew. And, at that time, Vince had approved all the covers. Mm-hmm. So I took this. I was so excited about it. I ran over at the television studio where it was, and I showed him, and he stopped, and he goes, Vince, what's this Austin 316? And I was like, Vince, Vince, did you not hear the promo yesterday? I said, Vince, this is it. Yeah. This is gold.
And this is Monday afternoon, just the next day?
Either the next day or a couple days
probably,
after. A couple days after. I said, Vince, this is it, And he looked at me, he says, Vince, I don't get it. I don't like it. Take it off.
Did Austin, did he get permission to do a post-match promo as Jake Roberts was walking to the back, or did he almost improvise that when he went, he beats Jake or whatever happened, Jake's walking to the back, Austin goes up and just takes over the show basically. Was that part of it? Were you aware that he was actually going to cut a post-match promo?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so
yes.
that's
because he had run over the promo beforehand with him.
But it was, I mean,
right,
it just blew me away because, you know, like I said, when the words came out of his mouth, I knew. I mean, the T-shirts, the slogan. I mean, I knew it was gold, and Vince still wasn't getting it.
Because I have to confess something. Because Steve Austin, and I've never said this before, and I don't think he'd care now. When he was when he went to ECW, he was out of WCW. He was frustrated. I did a long interview with him. It was in one of the Pro Wrestling Torch yearbooks, and we kept in touch a little bit. And it was a couple days before King of the Ring. He's on the phone with me, and I've got my notes at home. I keep every note I have, and I've got it. And someday, if I can have his permission, I'm going to go and take my chicken scratch notes out. And he's telling me his plans. Austin 316. He's brainstorming it with me on the phone, saying, Vince won't let me talk, but I want to talk, and I've got this plan. And I'm going to go out there. And he starts telling me how I don't care if they approve it or not. This is what I'm going to do with the pay-per-view. And his plan was, whether he got approval or not, he was going to do it. And apparently he tried to get approval, and it was like, go for it. And I just remember thinking, because I mean, I was a cheerleader for him because I knew what he could do. And in his mind, he's like, I have to grab it. I have to take it myself.
Exactly. That's it. And nobody gave it. I mean, I don't want to say nobody gave it to him because Vince did give him the airtime. But I mean, you talk about a guy that grabbed it.
He knew. He went from having no confidence in WCW, even though he was doing good work, to having fun in ECW, not knowing it's my future in Japan. Where you don't talk, there's no promos. He was trying to decide, should I go to ECW or Japan because WWF's not returning my calls. Finally, he goes to ECW, then he gets to WWF. They won't let him talk. He's even more frustrated, but he's confident. And then he comes up with it, and it changed the business. And that was a case where Vince McMahon doesn't get credit for it, and you're not taking credit for it. That's something that happened. It just happened.
But you got to understand, he was smart enough to pull it off. Not everybody can pull that off. That conversation he had with you, he knew exactly what he was going to do, when he was going to do it, and nobody was going to keep him down. So I mean, he was smart enough to be able to pull that off.
Well, it's a perfect example of what we hear so frequently about how, you know, when you have the boys talking about, I didn't get a push, he's getting a push, I'm not getting a push, and it's just, you know, it's true that, you know, in the wrestling business today, it's not about getting a push. People don't get pushes. They get opportunities. And if they take the ball, run with it, and deliver, they will get more opportunities. If they don't, if they fumble, if they drop the ball, if they end up dropping it and kicking it, you know, for 10 years, they're not going to get more opportunities.
And
Austin was a guy who took that ball, ran it across, ran it in for the touchdown, and that was it.
And he didn't think he had anything to lose at this point. He knew he could do more than he was being given the opportunity to, because that gimmick was saddled on him, was one of those stereotypical, and he had to break that mold, and he did. And that glass breaking, it's so apropos to what he did. Now, once Austin 316 takes off, fans made it a phenomenon. They're bringing signs, Austin 316. It clicks because, you know, Jake Roberts deserves credit for this because Austin was, you know, he was a heel, but fans were cheering him, and Austin called out Jake on what he felt was, you know, using Bible terminology in a way that he felt was twisted and not genuine, whatever, and he went with it. And then there was some people might have been sensitive to it. Was there any concern at that point, at that moment, about using something from the Bible in that kind of a hardcore, edgy way? Was that a concern that was brought up?
No, I mean, no. I mean, no. It's just, you know,
Jerry Jarrett was offended by it. He told me that. You know, I mean, he was like, that's blasphemous. It was his word to me about that gimmick, that phrase.
Again, it was listening to the people. And like you said, once they started with the signs, they want it, we're going to give it to them. I mean, and that's really what it came down to.
And it was a matter of still, but also not giving in to immediate gratification and giving it to them all at once, because that was when the audience was really starting to respond. That was the moment that really marked, even though from your perspective, from Vince's perspective, the moment that put Austin on the map was when he put the headsets on for the first time. For the fans, that promo at the end of King of the Ring and winning King of the Ring is what put him on the map. And then what solidified it was either the next pay-per-view or 2 pay-per-views later when he had the match with Brett. And in the course of one match, and I remember watching this as a fan and just completely being blown away by the psychology, because also I was wrestling at the time and I was very much into the psychology. In one match, essentially turning Brett heel and turning Austin face in one match, which was, to me, perfection as far as execution.
But I also think, I mean, we have to call a spade, and I mean, I'm convinced. I mean, and as over as Austin 316 was, and you know, I mean, for everything he was and he represented, I mean, I'll be the first to say he would have never ever, you know, reached the movie star status that he did without the Vince McMahon character.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
You've got to have a great foil.
I'm sorry. He would have hit a certain level, but without that character to play off, and you know, let me tell you something. That's what people don't understand. You had two of the best in the history of this business working an angle based on reality. The blue collar worker, the white collar boss, that affected and touched every. I don't care how long we're alive. I don't care how long the wrestling business exists. You will never, ever, ever see chemistry like that again.
And you'll never see pops in the crowd at that level. If you watch the Monday Night War DVD and you see that footage and you compare it to what you see now for the most popular babyface out there,
never happened.
The intensity of emotion and feeling and bond that those fans had with Austin when that glass broke and he came to the ring and he just had a way about him.
But the thing is, too, which we've got to, you know, you've got to give credit, was Vince in his role was every bit as good as Austin was in his.
And part of what made that work is that Vince, it was such, it's where the Hogan turn came out of nowhere in WCW. The Vince turn, not that it came out of nowhere, but there was such a multi-decade history of him being the straight man.
The fans knew him. He had been around forever. They knew him. They felt like they knew him. And also, as a fan, you knew he was the owner of the company, but yet this was the first time that was being used in the storyline.
But you know what, too, you got to give Vince credit for, and very few are able to do this. And every time I see not only a wrestler do it, but every time I see, you know, an actress do it or an actor do it, I mean, I'm really taken by them. I'm really taken by people or actors and actresses that are able to laugh at themselves. Now, the thing that amazed me here was Vince McMahon probably has one of the top 3 biggest egos on this planet. It's probably Vince, Donald Trump, and throw whoever you want in there as a third. The guy's got a huge ego, you know, the body and, you know, the whole 9 yards. But the bottom line was, for business purposes, for show purposes, for all the right reasons, he goes out in the ring and he wets his pants.
And gets just humiliated.
Now, you see, you've got to give him all the credit in the world for that, because, you know, he was smart enough to realize what he had to do, you know, in order to make this thing go.
That also comes. That comes to a lot of that is him being in this business, being this business for as long as he had been, knowing how to be an effective heel and how to show your ass as a heel, but still keep your heat. And that Vince there was never anybody better about that, because Vince could show his ass one week and then the following week have 10 times more heat on himself.
And that's something Ric Flair was great at too.
Yes,
in his day,
absolutely.
Ric Flair would get humiliated. The term "show your ass" it means humiliate yourself so the fans laugh at you. And then the next show, you are back on top of the world, and you're pretending that didn't happen, and the fans are so angry because they thought they finally got to you, and they didn't. You're still on top of the mountain. Flair did that. Vince did that. Good heels do that. And you're right. He was so good at that. What was Austin like behind the scenes, working with him during the whole stretch? Did he change as he got famous? As he was injured, did that change his whole persona? Was he a likable person behind the scenes? Talk about Austin, the person.
Okay. Austin behind the scenes. Well, you knew him earlier than I did. I came in, the King of the Ring, I came in 1 year to the day after he won the King of the Ring, and that was the beginning of the whole McMahon-Austin storyline building up. Because that was a gradual progression, because it didn't become Austin McMahon right off the bat. So maybe you can speak to what he was like from the beginning.
Well, you know, it's funny, because the day he won the title, we were at the television the next day, and I remember Vince saying to me, "You're with Austin 24/7. I don't care about anybody else. You stay with him 24/7." And I remember,
was this the WrestleMania when he won the title?
No,
he lost WrestleMania. He lost
with Tyson.
But when he lost to Bret Hart, that was when he became a star, and he became a big star by losing, which is great. But then when he won the title, then you're saying Vince knew he had it.
That was it. Vince said, "Vince, nobody else. You know, it's all about Austin, all about Austin, all about Austin. Stay with him, stay with him, stay with him." And the one thing I saw as time progressed that was sad, okay? And I'll be honest with you, this is not This is not a reflection on Steve. This is a reflection, I think, on how any human being would have reacted under those circumstances,
Also the
including
business.
myself and the business. But what happened was the success with the Stone Cold Steve Austin character came so fast and so hard and so overwhelming. And keeping in mind the picture you painted leading up to that, getting fired at WCW, EC, the whole progression, now the success came so fast and so furious that, this is only my opinion in working with them, a certain amount of paranoia set in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that paranoia set in because Steve was scared to death that this can end just as quickly as it began.
And because there was a reason to be paranoid, because Vince McMahon had a history of trying to make sure nobody got too much power because he had been burned before. And Austin felt, and probably to a certain extent it was true, there were forces working against him because he had too much power, be it other wrestlers. And even Vince just tried to keep him in check a little bit. There was a big Boss Man, something with Boss Man that happened once on TV where Austin felt it was done to put him in a bad position to show, see, the production people have the power to make you look good or bad. And that's where I think he started. So much was going on that he felt, you know what, there are forces working against me.
Plus,
too,
it was
if I
also
get too
coming
big.
from the WCW backstage, which
Yep.
I'm sure we'll get to, but which was very different from the WWF locker room.
But you know what,
and it was the Wild West.
I also got to be honest here, and you know,
Excuse me.
maybe I'm naive, maybe I wasn't, but I've got to be honest with you. In working that closely to the situation, I never saw Vince portray that.
Yeah.
I mean, I never. I've seen Vince do that with other people.
Yeah.
But I mean, with Austin, it was the pedal was to the metal, man.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think Vince was concerned. I mean, it was
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
It was money, and he knew it was money, and he knew it was on the right track, and you know, we were going to the moon with this thing. But unfortunately, like I said, I think there was just this feeling of it could all end tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you could see as the weeks grew by, as his popularity was growing, he became more and more paranoid. Whereas now you're trying to write a promo. You're trying to write a storyline. You're trying to put him, and it was very difficult because you're always trying to put him in a unique situation.
Yeah.
Trying to do something new every time, so it didn't get stale.
But now he was looking at it like, is this going to hurt me? Or are they trying to hurt me? And it almost got to the point that he would poke holes in things until he finally found something.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he
Yeah.
wasn't satisfied until he found something.
Did he do this respectfully, or was it to the point where he had so much power it was almost difficult to work with him, or was it he's paranoid but polite?
Paranoid but polite.
Okay.
Steve was never difficult to work with. I
Yeah.
mean, he was never difficult to work with. But the paranoia became a problem because, you know, I mean, I know me personally. Every week I was trying to put him in different, unique situations and really, you know, rattling my brain to come up with that. But he was always just so defensive and always trying to think that I was working the other way. You know, and after a while, you know, that just became a little difficult.
And how was Steve with other wrestlers? Was he well liked? Was he one of the boys, so to speak, playing pool and popular, or did he separate himself and kind of go off to the side?
It's interesting because there were aspects of Steve's personality where he kept to himself.
Yeah.
But as far in general, he was one of the boys. He loved hanging around, laughing with the guys, pulling ribs, just having a good time in general backstage. But you could see the more that you know,
The
again,
weight of
in my
fame.
opinion, the weight of the fame and the paranoia that it seemed to be kind of took hold in him. He kind of, you know, he still was one of the boys, but yet he spent more time by himself because he spent more time trying to figure out, well, what am I doing? What do I need to do? Am I doing the right thing? And going with what Vince was saying before, again, a lot of what he came to have problems with was, you know, because, again, we were trying every week to do something bigger, better, fresher, newer, because that was the whole thing about Steve's character.
Let me just interrupt
new.
for a second because I'll give you the perfect example. While Ed just said this, and this is a perfect example. I'll never forget, and I don't know if you were there or not, where I came up with the idea, and I don't think you were there because I think I came up with the idea. But when he drove in the beer truck,
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never.
No, I was there.
Oh, were you there?
Oh,
But
dude.
I'll never.
You're gonna
forget.
interrupt me and then
I'm
say I
sorry,
wasn't
bro.
there?
I'm sorry.
You gotta interrupt
But no,
me.
but here's the deal. I'll never forget when we came up with him driving in the beer truck,
Yeah.
and Ed and I are trying to figure out the logistics of this thing. I'll never forget. I was so excited to bring this to him. Steve, you're gonna drive a beer truck.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. I laid this out to him, and I was so excited about it. And he looked at me and he said to me, "Why can't I just drive in my pickup?" And but that's
this
what
was
I mean.
after we had done the Zamboni.
Right, that's what I mean. I was like, Steve, a beer truck.
Yeah.
I mean, but see, that's what I mean. It would get to the point of, him kind of looking at us in the corner of his eye. Okay, what are these guys trying to do here?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and that was really sad because we were on his side.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, the more that we did with him, the better that the show did.
Right.
The more
Yeah.
interesting
Right.
stuff
Yeah.
we did, the better the show did. So, I mean, it was a shame that we had to have those problems to do it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it seemed to work out okay.
Yeah.
I think people know who he is.
Yeah.
Vince, since you've been out of WWF, when you were gone, a lot of people have said wasn't that influential. One of the things that they hear is scripting of interviews. And there's been different points of view on how much word for word or talking point for talking point ideas were presented to Steve Austin, to The Rock, to some of the wrestlers. Was there a difference? Were undercard guys scripted almost word for word? Were top guys given more leeway? How did that work? What is the truth on how that scripting worked out?
It just depends on the individual.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's really what it came down to. You work so much with this talent, you knew who could do what.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was some guys started with heavy scripting, and then you kind of weaned them off it.
Okay.
Some guys needed a lot of scripting at the beginning just because of the character, like Goldust or Val Venus.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, we had to script that to create the character,
Yep.
but that really is more of the personality that you're dealing
Plus,
with.
also some guys preferred it.
Right.
Like
Right.
like Jeff.
Right.
Jeff Jarrett
Oh, yeah.
was
To
a
this
guy.
day, he does
To this
that.
day,
Yeah.
Jeff Jarrett was a guy who he wants you to write it out, and he goes off, and I don't know how he does it, but incredibly quickly memorizes it word for word,
Okay.
and he delivers it. But there are other guys like Austin who would just want. He would say, "What are my bullet points?
Yep.
What are my bullet points?" And he would make sure, and he would nail them.
But a lot of that was real important at the beginning when you're
Defining
molding
a
the
character.
Like
Okay.
I mean, I remember when Triple H was just starting with DX. I mean, I probably wrote every word that came out of his mouth because it's just vital at the beginning stages. But week by week by week by week, as they get into the character, they wean off of it.
Besides Steve Austin, The Rock was probably, if you had to pick two people out, without question, the other person who contributed to WWE being so hot for that stretch of time in the late 90s. Talk about the beginning of Rock. He's in the Nation of Domination, a group of wrestlers, and everyone's kind of noticing there's something special about him, even though as a babyface, as a good guy, he was booed by fans, and people were saying he's never going to be anything. He's too smiley and happy. He gets an NOD, he gets an attitude, and he starts getting noticed. How did he end up being pulled aside and getting a push as a top star? Who noticed it? How did that happen?
Listening to the crowds.
Yeah.
The crowds were responding to him.
Well, the thing is, that was another deal where were you there at the very beginning?
Not the babyface. I came in NOD, and that was
that was
turned it.
another thing where he was rocking my Via. It was horrible.
With a fun hair.
That was a perfect example
Right.
of they'll eat what we feed them.
They'll eat what we
Yep.
feed them. He got hurt, and then I'll give credit where credit is due. I was writing the TV at the time, and Bruce Pritchard actually said to me, when Rock gets healthy, and why don't we put him in the Nation of Domination, NOD? And I mean, I didn't see it, but we had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I was like, what the heck, he was getting healthy. We had to find a spot for him.
Yep.
So we put him, in with the Nation of Domination, and of course, Farouk, was the main character at the time. And I just remember just watching Rock in the background and watching his eyes and watching his mannerisms. And again,
He stole the scene.
Yes.
it's the Steve Austin story.
Yep.
It's the same thing, and people started reacting, and I'll never forget this. As I'm watching him, I keep from somewhere, I was getting this vision of The Rock in the third person, The Rock this, The Rock that, The Rock this. But what kept me from going anywhere with it was I was a huge Don Morocco fan. And I kept thinking that it's too disrespectful to Don Morocco.
Who was known as Don the Rock.
The Rock, you know, and that's all I could think about. But finally, you know, I'll never forget it. It was we were at Monday Night Raw, and I went up to him, you know, and at that time it was Dwayne. And I said, you know, Dwayne, I said, there's just something that's with me, and I want to share this with you. And he goes, what? I said, why don't you just try to go out there and refer to yourself as in the third person? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, everything you say, it's The Rock says this, The Rock says that, The Rock said, The Rock, The Rock, The Rock, The Rock. And he just looked at me, he goes, okay, I'll try it. And it was, I mean, he literally was going out in half an hour.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a Steve Austin moment. He went out there and started referring to himself as The Rock. And I'm sitting in the back and I'm saying...
Yep, I remember seeing the same thing and thinking the same thing. There's something
but
here.
again, let's make one thing perfectly clear, okay? It was all him.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have said those words to 50 other guys.
Yeah.
It was all him. And let me tell you the one thing about The Rock where I've said this and I'll say it again. I don't think there's going to be another star in the history of this business that is bigger than The Rock. And the reason being, in my opinion, the thing that was so much different about him, you know, people have charisma, people have good looks, people have all these things.
Yep.
But the thing that was different about him was he was so much smarter than everybody else. He had such an intelligence level, nobody could touch him. I mean, the conversations I used to have with him and what was going through his mind, he was just so much smarter than everybody else. And that's why I believe you're never going to find another individual that has just all those gifts and is able to take all these gifts and just, you know, go out and do what he does. And it's just another scenario like Austin, man. All the credit goes to him because he was smart enough to be able to pull it off.
Ed, was there a downside to working with Rock? Did he get a big head? Was he ever full of himself? Did he ever go, I am smarter than everyone else, and kind of take on an air of superiority around people?
Actually, no, and it's without hesitation. I say that Rock is, I mean, because I believe, because of that intelligence, that fierce intelligence that he had, and he would analyze everything, but not in like the way that we talked about with Steve. He would analyze everything and try and see how to improve it. What can I add to it, as opposed to what won't work.
But the difference between the two, and again, a lot of it had to do with how they got there. The difference between the two was the confidence. Rock knew he was better than everybody else. He didn't care about politics. He knew he
hadn't been let go from WCW.
That's right.
He had, you know, he hadn't been. But he did have a lame gimmick slapped on him.
He went through
from
it
day one. But I mean, Rock also
supremely confident.
He was very confident, but not arrogant. And not cocky. Just confident, sure of himself. And I mean, he was always so easy to work with. He was such a pleasure to work with because it was literally working together and working, you know, with him to get the best we could out of him.
Is it safe to say you looked forward to working with Rock more than Austin just because it was more of a...
It was less of a tug of war.
Okay.
With Austin, it was always ultimately, at the end of the day, it was all for the best, you know, in the best interest of the product. And Austin, like Vince said, polite, yet he could be very stubborn, and it was like a tug of war. But Rock,
the frustration with Steve was, Steve, we're not trying to hurt you. We're on your team. We want to get this to the next level, and that was the frustration. But you know, again, to me, the amazing thing with Rock was the whole time, you know, from Rocky Maivia at Madison Square Garden to the last day I left. It was the same guy, man. It was the same guy.
And he was respectful with everybody from top to bottom.
And was Austin respectful of the little guy behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, he very much was. But I mean, when you think of a guy at the level, I mean, because even, especially now, at this point, with The Rock's career blowing up in Hollywood and all that, he's gone even further than Steve did. But there was not even the slightest inkling of that.
How did Steve and Rock get along? Was there professional jealousy? Was there respect? Did they hit it off personally? Did they keep their distance? What was going on between them? Because Austin was first, and then Rock comes along, And Austin's no longer Hulk Hogan and then everybody else. Now it's Austin and Rock and everybody else. How did that work?
I think, and again, this is just my opinion, I think there might have been a touch of jealousy on Austin's part, but it never affected his professionalism at all. Never. I'm not doing the job. Never.
Austin had what Hogan didn't have, which was a Larry Bird to the Magic Johnson. That I think helped both of them. And as much as maybe they each might have rather been in Hogan's spot, it's Hogan and everybody else. In a sense, they also had to appreciate that they had each other to work off of.
But again, with Austin too, Austin was smart enough, and Ed kind of just hit on him. He was the same to everybody from top to bottom, and him working with Rock was business, and it would make him more money.
Right.
And
he knew that.
Steve was always smart enough to know that. He would do whatever was right for business, including the Shawn Michaels match. I mean, that was a catastrophe, but business. And I mean, Steve always was business. He always was.
Talk about the catastrophe. What was a catastrophe?
Oh, boy, man. I could tell you stories till 3 o'clock in the morning, man. It's at the time of the Austin and Shawn match, Vince and Shawn were not talking, and I was the middleman. And I used to get from Shawn, go tell Vince this, go tell Vince that, go tell Vince this. And at the time, poor Hunter was stuck in the middle of it because he was part of DX. But man, at that time, you know, Shawn was at just such a bad place, man. And he'd be the first one to tell you today.
It's all on record. He's talking about
no question about
it.
But he was at such a bad place. But there's one thing I want to say is we talk about Austin and we talk about Rock, and, you know, I've talked about this in my book. To me, the most talented performer I ever worked with was Shawn Michaels.
Overall or in the ring? Or
overall, because Shawn didn't have the gifts of Rock. He didn't have the gifts Rock had. But when it came to being a star, I mean, to this day, I'll still say he was the, he was the biggest star that I ever worked with. And I had such a love-hate relationship with Shawn. I mean, that's a guy that I wrote a lot of his stuff. And, you know, he would come to me a lot, but a lot of it was love and hate. A lot of it, I mean, and I'm sure he'd be the first to say it, you know, there were some drugs involved, so you weren't always, you know, working with...
You didn't know what Shawn would show up.
You didn't know what Shawn would show up. But, I mean, as far as talent, I mean, I just, to this day, I think the guy's incredible.
Now, DX, Triple H, the rise of Triple H, he's this third element in the boom period of WWF. Steve Austin and The Rock, mutual respect. They became big stars at about the same time. You know, I mean, there's, you know, Austin first, but then Hunter's trying to figure out, where do I fit in? You've got Austin with his injuries. You've got Rock with a movie career that gave Hunter some options. What was Hunter like in the formative stages, and did he seem driven to be one of the top guys? Was he just happy to be a second-tier guy who got lucked into a top spot? What was he like early on? Because now we know he's the top dog, but what was he like when Rock and Austin were around?
He was absolutely driven. I mean, Hunter, but again, Hunter was one of the hardest working guys in that company. Hunter knew that Austin was here and Rock was here and Hunter was here. And Hunter knew that he wanted to be there, and he knew that one day he would be there. But he was not, you know, he didn't rest for a second. He was tireless. And he, again, I would put him more in the Austin camp in terms of just poking holes at everything and scrutinizing everything, because again, he was looking at it as, I'm not there, and I don't want the slightest misstep to keep me from getting there a second later than I should be arriving.
And they both.
He was hungry. He was rabid hungry, and he was great to work with, because if he took something, he would run with it and make it gold.
The thing about Hunter, and you know, I've said this before, is, you know, I got two small boys, and if I ever wanted to teach them a lesson on just, you know, dedication and hard work, Hunter would definitely be the example. And the reason why I'm jumping in is because you weren't here for this, but you know, when the...
You sure?
Yes.
The last time
you know, when I'll never forget when the tragedy went down at Madison Square Garden. Okay, you know what I'm talking about,
the
right?
curtain call.
The curtain call. And I'll never forget,
I was there?
Which is
No, it really wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Which it should be noted is how Steve Austin got his break. Triple H talks about that in the book,
Yes.
where Hunter was scheduled to win the King of the Ring.
Right.
He screwed up,
But
Austin gets a chance.
which is my point. I'll never forget. I went to the booking meeting the next day. This is when I was the odd man out, and man, it was like somebody shot somebody's grandmother. I mean, it was like,
the end of the world.
I was so entertained by they thought the business was dead. From this day
because
forward,
MSG is the center of Vince McMahon's universe.
Yes,
it always will be.
But man, I'll never forget it. And let's think about the consequences. Shawn at the time was the champion.
Not going to do anything to him.
Hall and Nash were on their way out. There was one guy. And when I tell you, I was there firsthand when they tortured him. They absolutely. And I remember going in locker rooms when he'd be by himself. And I'd say, Hunter, hang in there. You've got to hang in there. You know the game. You know what they're going to do. You got to hang in there. And they tortured him, and they buried him, and they beat him, and they tortured him some more. The wrestling games that I hate so much.
That made Steve, that have historically been done, and is where Steve Austin is coming from.
Yes.
Even though it maybe wasn't happening as much as he thought.
Yes.
The Hunter example shows where Austin got that paranoia from.
But you talk about a guy rising above it all. You know what? It personally hurts me when I hear people talk about Triple H today. And I haven't spoken to Hunter since I left. But it personally hurts me when I hear it because I worked with the guy for almost 3 years. And I don't believe for 1 minute that the Hunter today is the guy that people are telling me is. If anything's changed Hunter, it's the business. It's not Hunter. Because when you talk about heart, nobody could touch him. I mean, nobody could touch him.
Speaking of Hart, that's a lame transition. Bret Hart, Survivor Series. We've got to talk about that. Go ahead and talk about it. I'm not even going to get specific. What is your impression going back and kind of create your involvement or your impression of what happened there?
It's a real long story.
Yeah.
I mean,
and we don't need. Everybody knows the details. That's the good part about this story. We don't have to recount it in detail. But were you in favor of what happened at the time, and do you look at it differently now?
It's a very long story, and I don't want to sit here and plug my book, but I'm gonna because every detail is in my book when it comes out, and there's stuff that people don't know.
You could do 2 hours on it.
Absolutely, but there is stuff that people don't know because I was right smack in the middle of it. But I will tell you this, okay, and I will share something with you, and I don't even know if you're aware of this, but I understood completely 100% why Vince did what he did. And to this day, I stand behind him 100%.
What's something that people don't know who are on Bret's side of this and think Vince did a horrible thing? What's a fact that, or an instance that kind of makes you feel differently?
There's a couple of things. Number one, Vince did everything in his power to come up with an alternate finish. Everything, and had everybody involved. That's number one. Number two, the question was never not trusting Bret. The question was not trusting Eric Bischoff. Okay, and all Vince was trying to do was protect his company and everybody in it. That's all he was trying to do.
Okay, I'll take devil's advocate of you. Why lie to Bret? Why did Vince have to tell Bret at some point within 24, 48 hours of that match, Bret, I'm agreeing with you, looked him in the eye, what you are now proposing is fine with me, we'll go with that plan. And after all Bret did for that company, Vince went against
because I can tell you, leading up to that, at least a week leading up to that, Vince exhausted every possible scenario he could probably exhaust.
Bret shot everything
down. Shot everything down. And I don't want to just say shot everything down, didn't want to hear it. He wasn't losing to Shawn. In Canada, period. Okay, cut and dry. And I was there firsthand to know the ideas and know everything Vince threw out. Bret wasn't doing it, again, because of the history between him and Shawn. But what it came down to was not trusting Eric Bischoff. If Eric Bischoff would have went out on Monday Nitro the next day with Vince's belt, Vince was not going to allow that to happen. So I will say, Bret gave Vince no other choice but to lie right to his face. And Vince did what he had to do for his company and everybody in it, and I was a part of it at the time.
Did it hurt Vince to do what he did, or was he so worked up by Bret's stubbornness?
It ripped his heart out. It ripped his heart out to do what he had to do. There's no question in my mind. After the incident, Vince walked into Bret's locker room to get what he had coming, because he knew what he did, but he also knew he had no choice. But it ripped his heart out to do it.
do you think that Bret Hart took himself and his hero image in Canada so seriously, too seriously, that it made it actually difficult to reason with him?
You know, it's funny because there were people at the time in the WWF that were laughing at Bret.
Yeah.
I mean, no question about it.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about it is he took it very seriously.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about it is I can look back now, and I want somebody to tell me, okay, in the last 5 years or even the last 10 years in this business, who has been even close to being a hero in the wrestling business?
Mm-hmm.
When you look at it today, Bret Hart was truly a hero.
But how did losing to Shawn Michaels in Canada change that? It wouldn't. It was more. That's where he used the hero excuse as a reason to not do a job to somebody who he despised. And that's. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it's not that he didn't want to lose in Canada because he was a hero. He didn't want to lose to Shawn Michaels because of what Bret knew Shawn Michaels represented to him. That's where I say, is he taking things too seriously?
Man, I tell you what, I don't think he was taking things too seriously because it meant that much to him.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the moniker meant that much to him. And, you know, like I said, there were a lot of people that laughed at him, but I look back now and I'm like, Bret was a hero.
Yeah.
I mean, he really and honestly, truly was a hero. And when you look at the business today, there's nobody like Bret Hart. I mean, I really believe that, you know, he stands tall and he stands out perhaps more than anybody, you know, in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, I really believe that.
But one thing I'll say, let me come at it from the other direction. I agree with you, Bret being a hero, especially in Canada and for everything that he represents. But to me, what it comes down to is, yes, he was taking that very seriously, and it meant a lot to him. But by the same token, I mean, this is still, you know, Hero was a happy sideline to his day job, which was being a wrestler.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, you got to do what's right for business. And he did not seem, from what I've heard from numerous times we've talked over the story, he was not interested in, or it didn't seem like he was interested in seeing it from Vince's vantage point at all. It was all about where he was coming from and his point of view, and he wasn't willing to look at it from Vince's point of view, because if he was for a second, he could see how could Vince let this happen. He was going to going to WCW
because when
he
Bret
had the belt.
Vince felt vulnerable at this point, because it's, you know, people think about Mike Tyson happened,
Right.
Raw takes
Vince
over.
was vulnerable at this point.
Yes, and he got rid of Bret. Now, people on Bret's side say, wait a second, Vince told Bret to leave. I can't pay your contract. I'm going to default on your contract. Go negotiate with WCW. So people who are on Bret's side of this, one of the reasons they say is Vince sent Bret away. He should have accommodated him. That's side. The other side that you're talking about is Vince's side is feeling vulnerable. This is a time where anything goes. And Vince knows, because he played those same games with Jim Crockett Jr. with Survivor Series and Starrcade in '87. He knows anything goes, and anything was going. So you're right. Bret didn't put himself in Vince's shoes, and that's why I think what it comes down to is two people, both with their own agendas, and the guy with more power won out. Mm-hmm. Vince ultimately had the power to pull the strings to make what he wanted to happen. And the only way he could do that, the only way he could exercise his power, is by lying to Bret. He didn't choose to lie to Bret. He had to lie to Bret in order to protect the business, whether he was right or wrong or paranoid or not. That's where it comes down to, and that's where I don't really have a big fault with either side. It's simply the more powerful person won. Is that a fair way to maybe?
I believe so.
I think so. I think it is.
And plus, also the fortunate byproduct of it was that was the night that redefined the business.
Yeah.
As far as the WWF was concerned.
And it was a great opportunity for WCW had they chosen to use Bret differently, and had Hogan not played the politics that he did to sabotage things, that it would have been.
But you know, that goes right back to the bubble.
Yep.
Because I'll never forget when the Survivor Series incident happened and everybody was talking about it.
Yep.
I'll never forget. You were there for that?
Say I wasn't.
I'm not going to owe you.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'll never forget going into the production meeting the next day, and everybody's talking about this.
Yeah.
And their first instinct was to sweep this under the rug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I stood up, and I looked at everybody. I literally stood up, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are you absolutely kidding me? This is, you've got what you wanted without even planning it.
Yep.
This is what everybody is talking about, and you want to sweep this under the rug. So I mean, and I could tell Vince listening and listening and listening, and it was everybody against me. And finally, that's when the Vince didn't screw Brett, Brett screwed Brett interview came, and that was the start of it. I mean, that was really the start of it.
Who was it? Your idea for Vince to sit down with JR in a setting not all that different from this one, and do this interview that was unlike really anything we had seen, where he was talking, you had to read between the lines.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it was all there.
I mean, it was both of us.
Yeah.
I mean, it was both of us, because I said, Vince, you've got. My point to him was, you are walking around the office with a black eye.
Mm-hmm.
You need to explain to people why the boss has a black eye, if not for anything else.
Yeah.
So I mean, then we talked about the format and how it was going to be done, and that right there is what started getting people on board.
And people knew this was real because Brett left.
Yes.
There would have been no incentive for Vince McMahon. I mean, some people have conspiracy theories, but there's no reason for Vince to give Brett all this attention when Brett was leaving, other than he had to protect his belt. In Vince's mind, that's what he felt.
Yes.
And again, it was highlighting what happened at the end of the pay-per-view, as opposed to sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah.
Because as a fan, because I was watching, because I wasn't there that time, I was watching as a fan. My butt was in my seat watching Raw the next night, even if I couldn't be. I was going to be watching Raw the next night because I wanted to see how were they going to deal with this? How were they going to follow this up? Were they going? Because in my mind, I was like, okay, they're probably going to sweep it under the rug because it obviously was not planned. So
Shawn Michaels knew, and he denied it for years, and now he's gone. He's totally on record admitting it on Confidential. Who else knew that there was going to be a swerve? Shawn Michaels, Vince McMahon, the referee. Who else?
I knew to some degree, because in the booking meeting prior to that, we talked about it.
Yeah.
But between the booking meeting and the show, Vince stayed a million miles away from me.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know whether he was going to do it or not.
Okay.
But I that night, and I mean, for the longest time, I didn't know whether Shawn knew or not. I mean, he played great that he didn't.
Yeah. I went over that tape like the Zapruder film, and I was looking at Shawn's reactions, and I picked it apart. I knew Shawn knew from watching that tape frame by frame because of a contrived, but yet it wasn't. That's just my interpretation. Other people, because Shawn swore that he didn't know because it was so important. He, as one of the boys, wasn't in on swerving one of the boys.
See, that's the point where Shawn's head goes back and to the left, back. To the left.
Man, I'll never forget, the thing that hurt the most about that was, again, I understood why Vince did what he did, and I loved Brett. I mean, I didn't think any differently of Brett. I mean, I love Brett. I had to wind up, having a one-on-one with Brett and telling him, Brett, I support what Vince did.
Yeah.
I love you, but I would have done the same thing. But man, I'll never forget, the thing that hurt the most that night was Mick Foley walking past me, and he looked at me and he said, Vince, he said, you should be ashamed of yourself. And you don't understand, coming from Mick Foley, that was like coming from God.
Now, I'm still not sure with your answer. Did you or did you not know or have a strong feeling this was going to happen?
We got to get the book.
Okay.
Because there's a lot I didn't tell you.
Yeah.
But we got to get the book.
Gotcha.
We got to get the book.
Owen Hart. Owen Hart. I mean, we talk about memorable nights in wrestling. This is far and away probably the saddest night in professional wrestling. The worst night, because it was in front of everybody. I mean, he didn't fall in front of everybody, but everybody.
He did, but they didn't see.
The arena crowd saw, but people on pay-per-view knew something happened. It was, just horrendous. Looking back on it, I mean, there's been a lawsuit over it, all of that stuff, but a lot of people say Owen was put up there in an unsafe circumstance. I don't want to dissect the lawsuit because we don't have time or expertise to do that. But was there any malice behind the gimmick of Owen Hart that was meant to be making fun of somebody else where they lost sight of safety in order to try to prove a point?
I got to jump in.
Yeah.
Because that's so sad, man.
Yeah.
If anybody knew how much Ed and I loved Owen Hart, I can't even sit here and tell you, because you're gonna think I'm saying it because of the way the guy did.
There's parents who love their showbiz kids, but they still put them in a bad situation. Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Did you guys? No. You loved Owen, but did you lose perspective and put him in a situation?
Here's a situation, and here's exactly how it went down. And this is what people don't know. Okay, this is exactly how it went down. Owen was doing the tag team with Jeff Jarrett. Okay, we had come up with the idea of Owen falling in love with Deborah because just the thought of Owen in love to us was hysterical. Owen is Owen.
Yeah.
Yes. And the thought of Owen being in love.
Yeah.
There's
potential.
Yeah.
There's potential.
Absolutely.
I mean, we could have run with that for a long time and gotten a lot of entertaining stuff out of keeping them together, having that be just that tension there, but just the things that Owen, the character, would have done if he had a crush on somebody.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So how does that connect to?
Well, so what happened
Superhero?
was we pitched him the idea.
Yeah.
And Owen comes up to me and Owen says, he goes, Vince, I got to be honest with you. He goes, you might think this is goofy and this is corny and whatnot. He goes, but I'm telling you, my wife would really be upset by this. You know, my wife, Martha, I know it's an angle. I know it's for. So once he said that, the end. I mean, not even, no second thoughts.
Yeah.
But we had to come up with something because we had to progress the storyline.
Yeah.
So that's when we came back and we hit Owen with the Blue Blazer gimmick again.
Yeah. Which he had done in the late 80s.
Which he had
It was
done
first
in the
run
late
of it.
80s.
But he did it straight up just as a masked wrestler.
Right.
Yeah, without any character.
Right.
There was no
Right.
character
It
development.
was, it was actually an excuse for not having a character.
Yeah.
It was,
Right.
okay, we'll throw him out.
But this was going to be, you know, bringing the Blue Blazer back to life and doing it in a comedic way that we knew Owen would have been phenomenal.
Okay.
Okay, Owen was cool with everything. He had no problem with anything. He even said to me, he goes, Vince, I have no problem doing this, but at some point I've got to win a title so people will take me seriously.
Okay.
That's what his exact words, man. I was, Owen, cool, no problem.
Why the Blue Blazer gimmick? Because the argument is that people make, where they say there's some malice involved or deviousness behind it, is superhero Owen Hart. Blue Blazer making fun of Bret Hart, taking himself too seriously as a hero, or
Oh my God.
That's the
Hulk
first
Hogan.
time.
That is the first, because I was going to ask you where was the malice coming
That,
from?
and that's
That's the first time I've ever heard
That
that.
is
out
the
loud.
first time
Yeah.
I've ever heard.
Or Hulk Hogan making fun of the old.
Say
Hulk
your
Hogan.
prayers, take your vitamins. Yes, we did that in his promos because it just went hand in hand. But it wasn't. The character wasn't an excuse to make digs at Hogan.
So why the superhero gimmick for him? Why was that the backup plan?
The same way of him. The same reason why he was going to fall in love with Deborah. Owen was funny.
Yes.
Owen was a natural comedian.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, just like him falling in love with Deborah, we knew this Blue Blazer, who's supposed to be a superhero, is a stumbling, bumbling idiot.
Yeah.
Plus, couple that with the fact that everybody knows that Owen is the Blue Blazer.
Yeah.
And we were going to have Owen deny it. Them showing him footage, deny it, and getting humor out of that.
Yep.
And that was where we really, fell in love with the character and the angle.
So the night he died, he's going to be dropped down, and I've heard different things on this, and you guys can clear it up because my memory might not be right. Was he in a quick release mechanism so he could fall down and hurt himself?
You got to
not hurt himself, but stumble.
You got to back up first because
ahead,
again, this is what people don't understand.
Yeah.
First of all, when Ed and I wrote the show, okay, it was not written for Owen to descend. We never even discussed it.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sitting in my office and it's probably Thursday before the pay-per-view. Okay. I get a phone call from Steve Taylor, who is the director of operations, set up the buildings and whatnot. Steve Taylor has me on the phone, and Steve Taylor said to me, he said, Vince, Sting's people are going to be at the pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
The people that lower
Sting's
the
whole
people
gimmick,
that
there
lower
was
Sting,
tons of
they're going to be at the pay-per-view. Is there any way we can do something at the pay-per-view so that they can show us what they can do?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm sitting at my desk and I got my format in front of me and I'm like, Owen. I mean,
and we had lowered Owen before.
We had lowered him before, and I'm thinking if we can give Owen the grand entrance, I mean, again, just making him more of a star.
Plus, also, don't forget, it kind of went hand in hand with it because that was the night Owen was going to win the Intercontinental Championship.
Right,
He was going to beat the Godfather for that championship. Right. So it seemed like the pieces were coming together, and to give him a grand entrance the night he was going to win his championship, he had done it once or twice before that as well, or even more than that.
He did it once before
just
that.
with the Steve Blackman pinata gimmick.
But the thing was, so he says, so I'm looking at the format. I said, yeah, Owen. I said, let's do Owen, and not thinking anything twice about it. What people don't understand was it wasn't a part of the show. It was no big deal.
Right.
If Owen would have said at any time, I have a problem with this.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of heights. I really... Over and done with. The night of the pay-per-view, okay, after he had already done it during rehearsal.
Yeah.
Owen came up to me and he goes, Vince, he goes, I just got to ask you one favor. And I said, what, Owen? He says, you know, I went through rehearsal and they lowered me. He says, you have me coming in second. He said, what happens is it takes me a while to get out of my harness. If I'm in the ring second, you know, the Godfather will be able to beat me while I'm in my harness. Yeah. Could we just switch entrances? Yeah. Could I come in first? So I said, Owen, you know, no problem. It's done. That was it. There was never, I don't want to do this. I'm afraid to do it.
And plus the Deborah story of Owen saying he was uncomfortable with something. That's a testament to the fact that Owen knew
if he had
said that. He knew that if he had a problem with it, it would have been addressed.
And I'll say this is important. 5.5 years ago, I interviewed you for The Torch. It's the exact same story you told then.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, you know, people, you know, it's like, that's exactly
because,
the same
you know,
story.
Wade, my rule of thumb is, and I will swear on a stack of Bibles, I never one single time asked somebody to do something they didn't want to do.
But the story's out there that Owen said he told people previously he's afraid of heights. His wife says he said that.
Well, you know what? But I'll tell you what. If he did, the relationship Ed and I had with Owen, I cannot understand sitting here why he would have never said anything to us.
He never would have had the
I mean,
slightest
I'm not saying
hesitation.
anybody's lying or he didn't say that, but he knows how we love the guy.
And obviously, no matter what the intentions of the gimmick are to have fun with it. Dissensions were being done regularly. Shawn Michaels did it.
Right.
Sting had been doing it regularly.
Right.
It's done at NBA games. So
and we had done it with Owen before as well.
One other time, yeah. And he was kind of dangling there, and it was
right. And we did the pinata, the whole
So
the irony.
Quick release mechanism. Where do you guys fall? Is that out of your? Is that?
That's beyond our because once it's in the format or once it's decided it's being done, then it becomes like up to like people like Steve Taylor, people in operations, to arrange for the proper people to do that. And if there are any problems, believe me, they never had any problems about calling us and saying, this is a problem.
This isn't the right equipment, we don't have it here.
Right, exactly. We need to regroup. We can't do it the way that you're thinking of. We need to do it a different way. So, I mean, and we never got any wind of any sort of problem.
You didn't put him in a position where you had any say-so over making him more safe. It wasn't your department, and you put him in a position other people had been in before. Do you personally struggle with the fact that, you know, hey, you could have said on the phone call, nah, let's not. I mean, even if you don't feel like you should have foreseen it, is that a really difficult thing to live with?
Well, you know what, I got to be honest with you, and it's twofold for me now, and, you know, there might be people that take objection to this, and if there are, I'm sorry, but first of all, it was really hard for me for a very long time to deal with it because it was my pencil that went on that paper.
Yep.
And it was me who said to Steve Taylor without thinking twice, Owen Hart, okay? And that haunted me for a very, very, very long time. But, you know, after becoming saved and after becoming a Christian, I now understand completely that on that day, that was Owen's destiny. And it was meant to happen. It was meant to happen before he was born, and that for whatever reason, that's the way it happened. And there's nothing I would have been able to do. There's nothing Ed would have been able to do. If it wasn't meant to happen, it wouldn't have happened. So, I mean, you know, the bottom line is it could be debated for years, but it was a situation that was Owen's fate. And I mean, that was supposed to happen to Owen Hart. We can't answer why, but none of us could have changed it.
Ed, you do struggle at all with it?
I struggle with it in the sense that it's just how much I cared for Owen, how much I loved Owen, and the fact of the matter is that, like you said, it would have been as simple as going like that, and it wouldn't have happened.
He'd be here.
But but it's a matter of it's just, I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, I'm not a Christian. But I do believe in fate and destiny, and I'm not saying that necessarily was Owen's destiny, but it was. I mean, it just whatever happened, whatever events, whatever circumstances conspired together to cause this horrible tragedy, and the fact of the matter is that a very dear friend of mine that I love very much, you know, passed away that night, and I was there in the building, and, you know, it's a very difficult thing to even think about. But it's not like I'm not particularly haunted with it, because I know, like Vince said, there was really nothing we could have done.
Short answer on this one.
Mm-hmm.
Should the show have gone on? Yes or no, and in a couple sentences, what mentality
Let
made it go
me
on?
bring a quick little insight
Yeah.
into this.
Yeah.
Because we didn't even know.
Yeah.
It was chaos backstage.
And this is the thing too that a lot of people don't understand. When Brian Pillman died,
Yeah.
we had a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the Hart Foundation was working together.
Mhm.
Okay? I'll never forget about 30 minutes before the show, I think they were opening a match. I think it was some kind of a flag match or something, but I'll never forget, Owen called me into the locker room and said, Vince, come here for a second, you know? So I go in there and it's just him and I, and he goes, Vince, he goes, please tell me it's not true about Brian. Please tell me Brian's not dead. And I looked at him and I said, you know, Owen, I said, I'm sorry, man. You know, I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry. Owen laced up his boots and he went out there and he had the best match he could possibly have.
Yeah.
So was Vince right? Wasn't Vince right? First of all, under those circumstances, nobody is going to be logical.
Yeah.
There is no right or there is no wrong answer. Do I think Owen would have wanted the show to go on? Absolutely 100%.
Yeah.
Because I know, like I said, when Pillman passed away, he went right out that curtain like a professional, and
Yep.
it must have broke his heart to be in that ring, and he did it.
Yep.
So, I mean, I know inside that that's what he would have wanted, and you cannot...
The one thing that I think people outside the wrestling business don't understand, and I mean, I see both sides of this argument, and I so much so that I think either way is justifiable given the emotions, but people outside the wrestling business who are quick to criticize this, I don't think really understand the wrestling mentality that you're talking about with Owen that he had when Pillman died. And there's a
respect for the industry. There's respect for the business.
And I think that people inside the industry did not continue the show in a way, they would not have continued the show if they thought it was disrespectful to Owen. People outside the industry look at what happened and they think everybody was disgusted with it. 99% except for the person in charge who just wanted money. And I think, am I right in saying that other people behind the scenes, some agreed, some disagreed, but nobody felt going on with the show was just an obvious disrespectful move for Owen?
I don't recall hearing
even those who thought the
at
show
that
should have been
time.
stopped.
Because
didn't think it
at the
was
time,
disrespectful.
backstage, like I said, it was mass chaos.
Yeah.
We didn't know what happened because it happened in darkness.
Yeah.
We were rolling a pre-tape on the screen for the audience, and the arena was dark, and he fell while that pre-tape was rolling. So
even those who
nobody
disagreed
saw
with the decision weren't so...
we didn't know.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
We didn't know if he fell from 90 feet
Yeah.
or if he started his descent early and fell from 20 feet.
Right.
We didn't know if
But you knew he was
alive
dead, and
and-
a match or two after match or two later.
before the end of the show, we knew.
Yeah.
But at that point,
Yeah.
we had no idea
Yeah.
what was going on.
Because I mean, when he was loaded
We
in the
just
ambulance,
we knew he was badly hurt,
Yeah.
and we knew that he was loaded into an ambulance.
and
but-
Lawler's language on the air was, you know, it doesn't look good. I mean, the feeling was not good at all.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it's-
let me put it this way: if you knew, I'm not trying to be crass with my language here, but if you knew he was dead the second he hit the mat, would you have? Everybody knew that it was pronounced. Would you have had a different opinion on whether the show should go on? Would it have
I think it would have been much more cut and dried. I think it would have been less confusing because,
Yeah.
like I said, part of the confusion was nobody knew what happened. Nobody knew for sure.
Yeah.
Knew for sure what his condition was.
Yeah.
And
Once you knew, though, once
if
you
we
did
knew,
know,
like you said
Yeah.
again, if we knew the minute that he hit the canvas that he was dead, he had died. I can just answer for myself, and I would say absolutely the show should have been stopped if he had died right then and there. If the lights had been up, if everybody had seen it,
Yeah.
if it happened and it was beyond a shadow
Yeah.
of a doubt, just my personal feeling,
Yeah.
I would have said.
So do you think the chaos of the moment is enough of an excuse for people who thought this is horrible to go on with the show and that it shouldn't be looked back upon as a disrespectful moment?
I don't know if anything would be enough of an excuse if those people feel that way.
Yeah.
But it's not about making excuses. It's about you have no idea what it was like
Yeah.
to be backstage that night, and never before that night did it become so clear what a family and what a brotherhood it was behind those scenes. I mean, these were a group of people who we're on the road with, we take for granted, we're with every week, for days. Just huddled together in groups, crying, and and that's the next night as well. And
Should Raw have been canceled and a rerun aired in place, or should they have done business as usual, or was what happened the Owen Hart tribute show, which has been criticized?
They wanted to do business as usual.
Yeah.
And I went into Vince was talking to Kevin Dunn.
Yeah.
And I went into Vince's office and I heard the conversation, and I said through tears, Vince, if this show is in some kind of a tribute to Owen Hart, I am going home right now and I am not coming back. And I meant every single word. And you know what? If it wasn't, I would have left.
And I would have been right with you.
Because it couldn't have been anything else.
And what was
that.
McMahon's reaction when you said that? Had he not thought of that before, or had it been considered?
Man, Vince was put in such a bad spot, that whole situation, and he wasn't thinking rationally.
Yeah.
But all that Vince knew was he had to be the guy that was still in control. Somebody had to remain in control. If Vince would have broke down, the entire place would have broke down. I mean, if Vince would have lost it, I don't know what would have happened.
Captain steering the ship.
Exactly.
Were there any manufactured emotions on the air? That's been insinuated many places, that there were wrestlers who went on the air who exaggerated how close they were to Owen in order to draw attention to themselves. And I mean, did you sense that was going on? And obviously there were genuine emotions on some people's parts. Was there ever a point where you watched some of the tributes and said...
I don't know, because all I could say is I was so upset.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have been able to say one word.
Yeah.
They asked me to do it, and I was like,
And that's the thing. Everyone had a choice.
Yeah.
Nobody was strong-armed into doing anything.
No. But what was really sad, and I don't even know if this is true or not, but to read in one of the sheets that one of the reasons Eric Bischoff at the time said that we had done that was for ratings.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I read that, the only thing I could think of was, shame on you. But that tells you in a nutshell, that's what the wrestling business is all about.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
A level of cynicism and exploitation of anything is there.
Absolutely.
All right, you guys made a jump. That was one of the bigger stories of '99. The Monday Night War in full swing. You're at the center of it. And then here's a few key points that were going on at the time. Eric Bischoff, WCW's falling apart. Raw has taken over. There's little hope of WCW turning around just based on any signs. There's no signs of hope. Finally, the decision is made, in a nutshell, to get Eric Bischoff out. New corporate head comes in, Bill Bush, and he is trying to figure out how to fix this. And at the same time that's happening, SmackDown is added to the schedule. You are in a position now to have to do twice the work at a time of a very competitive environment. You weren't working 15 hours a week. You were working a lot. There's no consideration made towards your pay, and at the same time, WCW is looking for help. Kind of in a nutshell, recap, all those things kind of came together at once, and all of a sudden you have this opportunity, you first and then you, in that order, to make a major shift in the whole wrestling industry, and it was a major, major change.